So I was super lucky to get a scholarship several years back, a certificate in maternal mental health through Postpartum Support International, which is the organization that advocates, educates, and supports families around postpartum depression and other postpartum mental health disorders.
Lisa?
Some of the information that I'm going to present, I got from Wendy Davis, who was the professor who taught the classes. I've also cited the other resources and studies that I've used at the end of this training, and I'll make it available to you so you can, if you want, go back and read some of the studies. These are our objectives today, to kind of really go through, what they are, how they happen, when they happen, what the signs and symptoms are, what the effects on children are, and what we can do as volunteers to make a difference in these families' lives. All right, so perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. That's a fairly newer term that we're using, or PMADS is the acronym for it. When we talk about PMADS, we're talking about a collection of mental health symptoms that arise as a result of the pre, peri, or postpartum period for birthing, and sometimes non-birthing parents. So this new reference encompasses more than just postpartum depression and anxiety, which is what we're kind of used to talking about, because it is more varied. There's, obsessive OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar mood disorders, and postpartum psychosis. So PMADS are the name that I'm going to use during this talk, and it's sort of the generally accepted reference now when we're talking about these disorders. So the majority of women who are postpartum or perinatal experience some sort of mild mood changes during or after the birth of a child. We often refer to it as like baby blues. 20% now, it's actually grown since the pandemic, but 20% or more will experience some sort of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. And now from now on, I'm just going to call it PMADS during pregnancy or after childbirth. And so if you look at approximately 4 million live births occurring in the United States each year, that equates to about 600,000 birthing parents that will have some sort of PMAD. The majority of the PMADs are postpartum depression. So 15% of postpartum moms will develop postpartum depression. And sadly, it's actually believed that postpartum depression is much more common than the data would reveal. Some healthcare providers believe that the condition's prevalence might actually be even as much as twice as what's reported. If postpartum depression goes unreported and untreated, we can't really account for it. So we don't actually have a good, accurate number. Some health professionals think that it could be as high as 50%. Young mothers, it's much higher. Certain areas of the world, it's higher. So it's hard to say. Parents of all cultures, age, income level, they all can develop postpartum depression. Now, postpartum psychosis, which was referenced when I was talking about those two families, that's 1 or 2 out of 1,000 that develop postpartum psychosis. 10% of non-birthing parents report some sort of PMAD as well. And suicide is actually the leading cause of postpartum deaths in the United States today. Okay, so what causes it? It's not really fully understood, the actual cause. It's sort of attributed to what's often referred to as the perfect storm of specific circumstances, potential emotional vulnerabilities, hormonal changes, genetic factors. As I mentioned before, it affects people of all demographics, all cultures throughout the world. It's actually PMADs that is 40% of women postpartum develop PMADs in South Africa. So we're not the only country, we're not the highest country. But without treatment, symptoms can last weeks, months, and actually even years. One common theme, though, is income, access to care, social supports, and violence within the environment. All right, risk factors. So the top 5, now 6 risk factors are listed on the screen here, but history of clinical depression or some sort of mental health condition is a high risk factor for developing PMADs. Social isolation, which we'll come and talk about at the end of this presentation, is one of the top 5 risk factors. Then you've got domestic violence or some sort of previous trauma, past substance use disorder. Young parenting now has made the list of the top risk factors, and then extreme poverty. This chart here, this fancy chart, and I put I cited it, so if you wanted to go back to look, shows that essentially, if you have a history of clinical depression, you have twice the rate of postpartum depression or PMADs. Okay, so here's some of the other risk factors. Depression during pregnancy is also a very, it can lead to PMADs postpartum. But here are just some of the other, and a lot of this makes sense. If you don't have social support, so if you are a single parent, if you have a poor marital relationship, unplanned. Interestingly enough, the gestational diabetes raises your risk. Okay, so symptoms can appear anytime during the 2-year span from conception through the baby's first birthday. And so when we think about PMADs, what's usually said is that these set of symptoms will develop sometime within the first year postpartum. But if you think about when, basically the 2 years that begin with conception, any kind of mood disorders that are developing during that time is considered a PMAD. There was actually a study that was done with 4,500 women back in, I think like 3 years ago. It was during the pandemic. 25% of those studied reported persistently high levels of postpartum depression symptoms for even as long as 3 years postpartum. Here's a lot of signs and symptoms. I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but hopefully you can, as I'm speaking, you can kind of take a look at it. They can be variable. So not everyone will present exactly the same, but there are some themes that women will experience. Postpartum depression, for example, is characterized by extreme sadness. Those living with postpartum psychosis will deal with delusions, and we'll talk a little bit more about postpartum psychosis a little bit later. Some of the universal signs, are scary thoughts, difficulty sleeping, feeling out of sorts, feeling upset, crying. That's some of the things that you often will see. This is overly simplistic, but I thought I would show it anyway. So it kind of shows how mom will react given the left-hand side of circumstances and kind of comparing it. And again, like this is just summing it up. I feel like it doesn't give all the details, but I'll give an example. So if you have sleep deprivation and you have no mood disorder, you'd feel tired. If you had baby blues, you might feel emotional. If you had anxiety, you might feel irritable. And if you had depression, you might feel angry. So it kind of, as you can see, going from left to right, the symptoms or how it's presenting for you is more extreme, I guess is what I would say.
Can I just ask something really quick? I'm a nurse practitioner, and I've talked to families, and something that these obstetricians or pediatricians are telling these new moms is that they need to wake the baby up every 2 hours to feed the baby. Wouldn't that contribute to something like this?
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard from a couple families, And they just basically are like, no, we're not doing it. We're exhausted. They're
Yeah.
setting them up for failure, basically, which is kind of weird. But have you
I
heard
was,
that?
yes, I have heard that. I was also told that in my first pregnancy, to feed the baby every 2 hours.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, because mostly at the beginning because of milk supply, actually, to keep your milk supply high was one of the reasons that I was told to do that. And it was so difficult. I mean, it's like you hit like a brick wall when you're up all night. Later, I can talk about my second son because my daughter didn't sleep through the night until she was 8 years old. And so now I've got my son who I'm nursing every few hours and my daughter who's also not sleeping. So that's a perfect storm right there.
Yeah.
All right. So we really wanted to spend some time today talking about intrusive thoughts because this is something that you'll see, regardless of the PMAD that a mom is experiencing. So to define it, it's unwanted, often distressing thoughts that kind of pop into your mind seamlessly out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. The thoughts could be images. Generally, they're unexpected, undesirable, and they can be extremely disturbing and at odds of a woman's values, personalities, and history. So if you can just sort of imagine yourself doing something completely uncharacteristic of yourself, just having that thought. And so a mom might have that a thought of hurting her child, jumping into traffic. If they're religious, they may like imagine themselves jumping up into church and saying something blasphemous, or doing something in a religious setting that would be completely inappropriate. We don't really know exactly what causes and triggers intrusive thoughts. In many cases, there's no cause, it just happens. So everybody on this call has probably experienced some sort of intrusive thought. There was a study that was done with participants across 6 countries, not postpartum families, just of the regular population. 93.6% of the participants said that they've had at least one intrusive thought in the last 3 months. Let's see. Now, I think what's really important is just to kind of hit home that just because you're having the thought doesn't mean that you would act on it. So here are some common ones. I remember with mine, I suffered from infertility, and I'd had a baby loss prior to my daughter being born. And so I was so obsessed with my daughter potentially dying that I would wake her up just to make sure she was alive. I would sit there. I was like looking to see if I could see her belly rising. It was very, very, it was actually like traumatic, just being with her and worried about that. But, a lot of it would be unwanted thoughts of harming the baby, dropping the baby. What happens if the baby falls out the window? What would happen if I put my baby in the microwave? And what I think is really important is that the reaction of a mom when she's having these intrusive thoughts are, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? Why am I having these thoughts? And a lot of shame, a lot of fear. The mom knows that this is not something that one should do. And so she is feeling traumatized that she's actually having these thoughts. She's not going to do it. She's having these thoughts. And I remember my doctor saying to me, if you're worried that you're having these thoughts, it's okay. I don't want to rush through this one, but I remember having the thought, like, what would happen if I drop my child? Like I have an overhang. I didn't want to, it was just a scary thought. What would happen if? So important things. It's not part of the mom's character. It's a game that's being played on by her brain. Having an intrusive thought, I said it before, it doesn't mean that she subconsciously believes this thought or wants to act on it. it's really important if you experience a mom who is having intrusive thoughts that you just, sort of hit home that they're just thoughts. Your intrusive thoughts are increasing. If they're increasing or they're distressing you and it's affecting your daily life, we will tell our families to seek medical attention, because there are treatments that can help reduce intrusive thoughts. I think that one therapy that's used for intrusive thoughts is sharing about it. It's got a name. I wrote it down and I don't see if I can remember what it's called. Exposure and response prevention. So that type of cognitive behavioral therapy is really just sharing what's happening, and even just sharing what's happening can bring relief. There's just so much stigma around it is the issue. I mean, if you were to say to somebody you didn't know, I was thinking about stabbing my baby, obviously you would be concerned about what somebody might think of you. It's just it's so common for families who have recently given birth to have some of these intrusive thoughts, that it's really important that we take some time to normalize it for families. These are automatic thoughts. It's normal that women will experience this, and men as well. And it's just really important that we take the time to, just say, yep, this happens. It can be super frightening, but it's an irritating thought and it's not real. So if we can just emphasize that these are not real thoughts, they're just things that are popping into your mind. Now I'm going to just stop sharing for a moment here. And I would like to give Mollie some time to talk about her personal experiences.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, this feels so real to me right now. And I hope that what I'm going to be able to share with you, my stories, that I hope you're going to see how sort of the more clinical things that Lisa is talking about, the statistics and the lists of everything, how I hope that you can see them. So I would love if you want to listen to my story and tick off, oh, that's a risk factor. Oh, that's a risk factor. That's a symptom. See if you can identify some of them, because it'll be interesting. So again, I'm Mollie. Some of you may know me as the development and outreach director here at It Takes a Village. I'm setting myself a timer so that I know when my 15 minutes is getting close. And some of you may also know me as Mollie, mom to Rowan and Calvin. My oldest kiddo is 12 and my younger one is 7. And my postpartum perinatal journey with both of them is so different. So I don't think many of y'all know me in the before Northampton times. But so I had my older kiddo. I was living in New York. I was living in Queens, and I was working full time. And I was in like the corporate 9 to 5 kind of world, and was so excited about this. The pregnancy was, it was like that. It was pretty easy, some nausea, a lot of vomiting, but like otherwise very healthy. The labor and delivery was super fast. It was like bam, bam, that was easy. And I kind of knew enough, I knew what I had read in my books, like in my what to expect books, of like, you might not sleep that much. Okay. Baby blues. Okay. But I didn't consider myself to be at risk for anything. And I definitely noticed that I was having a hard time bonding with this child, because after the fact, I kind of am looking back on it, and I'm seeing those red flags after the fact. I remember saying a couple days, like a week in, I remember saying to my husband, jokingly, when are his parents going to come pick him up? Like, that's funny, you guys. I'm taking care of this newborn. No, when are his parents coming? to get him. And I kind of thought that it was more like, oh, you just feel overwhelmed. This is just really hard. But I literally was like, I do not feel like his mother. I mean, and a couple weeks in, I was like, I was looking at him going, I would die for you. I would jump in front of a bus for you, but I don't love you. It was all like, you know, like I know he's my responsibility, and I know I have this like primal urge to protect him, but I don't love him. He's just this little ball of like screamingness because he cried for 6 months straight. So I didn't sleep. I'm gonna cry already. Oh, I should have warned you. I will cry. It's fine. um, he didn't sleep for 6 months. He didn't stop crying unless I was feeding him. And so if I was feeding him, he was okay. But that also means I didn't sleep. Um, he was, now that I can look back on it, I can see him as very high need. And that's like a textbook phrase. His little body was overstimulated, and I was doing all the right things. Like I was wearing him, I was letting him sleep on me, I was letting him nurse when he needed to. I was everything for this baby, and he still wouldn't stop crying. I was also all alone. My mom had come to stay with us for about a week. My husband went back to work at 3 days because he had zero parental leave. He called in sick on the day that I gave birth, and his HR person was like, I don't know if they're going to approve that. And he's like, do you want me to put you on the phone with my wife who's literally in the hospital? They're going to approve it. But that's all he had. He had his couple of days, and then he was back. And so when my mom went home, I went from working full time, all my friends were in my office, to being alone in my house. So I lived in New York City. You don't have to live in the hill towns to be isolated. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have it. And later on, I met my neighbor in my building, and she literally said, oh, you're the one on the first floor with the baby who cries. And I said, yep, that's me. Nice to meet you. And it was literally people stopping me on the street going, you know, your baby's crying, right? It's like, you know what? Yes, I've noticed that my baby is crying. Anybody want to give me a hand with that? No? Okay, great. So there's also, I should have pulled it up. There's a photo that we've used in, you know, our marketing and everything of me and my baby at like 2 months old. And I remember looking at that picture going, I am such a fraud, because I remember that moment, and I don't love him. I do not love him. And so only after the fact did I was doing my training to become a childbirth educator. And I was reading the chapter on postpartum depression. And I went, uh-huh, uh-huh. Literally textbook. Like we kind of make a joke like, oh my gosh, that person's, it's textbook, whatever. I was textbook postpartum depression. Every single thing was yes, yes, yes. And I kind of looked around and said, why didn't anybody tell me? Like this was so obvious. And nobody, I had a therapist. It was, you seem like you're really, you know, having a hard time. Uh-huh. And my primary care physician at, you know, later on that year, she said, make sure you get some help next time. You don't want to do that to your baby again. That was shortly before I fired her. Just FYI. I also I had a history of depression and anxiety. I wasn't on any medication, but like I had a history of like panic attacks. And no one noticed. No one thought to warn me that it was like, huh, you know what? That might increase your risk. This is what postpartum anxiety feels like. I also had an undiagnosed thyroid condition, which was not helping the hormones. No one mentioned it. No one mentioned, oh, hey, this might screw up your thyroid. Like, it's pretty common. Um, and I didn't notice all of those textbook symptoms, that I wasn't sleeping, that I wasn't bonding with my baby, that I was crying, I was irritable, always, I mean, because I wasn't sleeping. Like it kind of makes sense. You're like, bickering with your partner because I'm not sleeping and you're not sleeping. Um, I also had those intrusive thoughts and didn't know what to do with them. And I remember finally reading something about, if those thoughts you're having make you uncomfortable, that's a good thing, because it means you're not psychotic. You're not in a postpartum psychosis. If those feelings make you uncomfortable, then it means you're still grounded in reality. That was so validating to me. And no one had mentioned it before. I'd never heard that phrase before. But so fast forward. Now, my kid is 12 years old. I'm still here. We both survived. We eventually kind of pushed through it. But it had to be a year, to be at least a year of active clinical depression that kind of nobody noticed. Fast forward 5 years. I'm living in Northampton. All my friends are doulas. I have done my childbirth ed certification. I work for It Takes a Village. I've got a therapist. I have a primary care physician that when I moved here, I said, hey, listen, I'm going to be having another baby at some point. I need a primary care physician that understands that I'm going to be breastfeeding if possible, that I'm going to be pregnant, I'm going to be birthing a baby. I have this thyroid condition. I need to make sure that doesn't screw with any of this. I had a primary care physician that when I went on an antidepressant, I said, but I'm going to want to have a baby in the next couple of years. So let's pick one that's good for being pregnant and good for breastfeeding, and not one that I'm going to have to choose whether or not I breastfeed my child or stay on my antidepressant. So I had ahead of time made sure that I had that care set. And what was interesting is that I knew that it wasn't just keep an eye on things after the baby's born, but during pregnancy. Because at about 5 months pregnant, I started to feel not great. We had tried for a while for this kiddo. I was clearly prepared for this baby. And I started feeling like maybe I don't want to do this. And not just kind of like, oh man, I'm nervous. It's maybe it would be better if I lost the pregnancy. Maybe it would be better if I fell down the stairs and lost the baby. That would, and I remember feeling that little devil on my shoulder that's like, maybe it would be better. That would be easier. And me going, shut up. You don't speak for me. And I said, okay. That's a thought that I didn't want. Ding, 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 ding. Hello, midwife. Hi. I think we need to talk about upping my antidepressants or something because I'm not okay. And she said, okay, call your primary care. So I call my primary care. Boop, 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 boop. Hi, primary care. It's me. We need to talk about upping my antidepressants or something because I'm having intrusive thoughts and they scare me. Ding, ding, ding. You should remember that phrase. I'm having intrusive thoughts and they scare me. Oh, okay. I'll see you tomorrow. Because that's what happens when you say I'm having intrusive thoughts and they scare me, is they will see you tomorrow. They might see you today, not in 6 weeks. So that's another barrier that we're aware of, is getting mental health care can take weeks. But if you know the right words, sometimes you can bump that up a little bit. I'm checking my stopwatch. Okay. So then my primary care says, listen, I'm a little uncomfortable upping your antidepressant because I'm not specialized in perinatal pharmaceuticals. However, let me call MCPAP for Moms, which is a Massachusetts program for physicians to talk to a prescriber who understands the physiology of pregnant and postpartum and breastfeeding people so that they can prescribe appropriately. So I had to go to Worcester to meet with this person, but there's only so many. So that's a barrier that we know about. The number of people who do that work is very, very small in Massachusetts. But within a week, I had the head of maternal fetal whatever at Memorial Hospital in Worcester sitting down with me and making sure that I was okay, that my physician could prescribe what she thought I needed. And then the insurance company wouldn't cover it, but I knew to say you need to do override whatever because my physician had said, listen, the insurance company's not going to want to cover this, but this is what you say. So all of that being, it went from a scary intrusive thought to appropriate medical treatment within like 2 weeks. It wasn't immediate, but that would not have happened had I not recognized those risk factors and those symptoms and understood the barriers to getting that kind of care. And at the same time, I also had Lisa on the phone who'd be like, tell me who to kill. I'll do it. You know, like I had people who could watch my preschooler while I drove to Worcester. I had a partner who said, take the day, go do what you need to do. Don't worry about what it's going to cost. Because that's, of course, is like, is insurance going to cover this? Blah, 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 blah. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of it. So I had a lot of people sort of on my team. And the difference was, I mean, astounding that I kind of stabilized. I had this baby. He was not a screamer like the first one. I mean, he cried, but at the same time, I had the support to deal with it. And Lisa, again, I remember calling her and saying, I just put him in his crib and walked away and shut the door because I don't know if I can handle this. And I cried on the phone with her. But that's what I needed in that moment was someone to hear it and to not judge me for it and not say like, oh my God, do I need to call DCF on this person because she's like neglecting her child? Nope, because that's exactly what I needed to do in that moment is put him down, walk away, and call a friend. So having a support of something like this village, and I'm gonna say, I mean, Lisa, I hope you weren't planning on using this. This morning, I texted Lisa about, I was listening to some podcast about a postpartum depression medication, and I don't have a tissue. Hold on. The host was saying that the issue in the United States is that parents don't have, adequate parental leave. They don't have adequate mental health support. They don't have things like home visitors or peer support. They don't have this village. And I'm standing in the grocery store listening to my podcast being like, but I did. I had it. And like, look at the difference that it made. And that's something that I feel so precious with this program because like, that's the impact that it can have is literally just being able to help someone recognize that they're not okay, but that they have it in them to make it okay. There is the support. We just have to get it to those mamas. And that's what you guys really do is you are that gateway. You're that connection to that outside world that can really make a huge difference. So I kept that to 15 minutes, Lisa. Like to the dot. I just want to say I am not known for my brevity.
Well, I still like maybe people want to ask you some questions.
Yeah, that would be
I'm
fine.
sure that there's ample opportunity for that too.
So yeah, do you guys have any questions about everything that I just told you?
I have a question. This is Betsy. Um, how did this affect your partner? How did this affect your partner? We talk a lot
I
about
think,
affecting the mother initially, but both of you
yeah.
are the caretakers of not only a newborn, but in your case, you have 2 children. There's a reference earlier in the slide that Lisa did that said it affects any gender.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that happened with you.
Thank you for saying that. So I think the first time around, I think my husband wasn't as in tune to mental health stuff as he is now. But I do remember a moment that he and I had. And I want to reference back to something that Lisa had shared in the sort of in this training about that the for intrusive thoughts, the sharing it, like the letting it out in a way that is like in a safe way. Because there was one day I finally said out loud, do you ever just want to take him and slam him against the door frame? Because that's what I want to do right now. And he's like, and I thought he was going to be so horrified. He said, no, I want to do it on the ground so that it bounces. And I was like, you're miserable too. He's like, I'm so miserable. Because and his personality is more like he kind of knows, like, I'm having a weird intrusive thought, like, it's not real, I won't worry about it. I am like, oh my god, what's wrong with me? So the fact that we both were able to kind of say it out loud was like, oh, we're not horrible people. Okay, we're not horrible people. And he was able to support me and reminding me to say out loud, you're not a horrible person, you're just really tired. And for him, he needed to have the words for it. So this second time around, he had the words to support me. I think he's an odd duck who doesn't feel things as much as I do, but he learned to be able to say it's okay to not be okay. And that, so him learning these steps too, I think was really important, and watching me go through it. But because I think he didn't know what to do. Who's crying? I'm crying.
Any other questions? Oh, I thought I was on mute. I'm sorry. Any other questions for
I just want to say, Molly, thank you for sharing all of that. It was very moving. And I can tell people, I've met Rowan a couple of times. He's one great kid. So whatever you did right.
Thank you. He's a good kid.
He is.
I'm afraid I'm giving him a complex stuff because he knows how much he cried as a baby. So
And they couldn't figure out why he cried like that. Nobody knew.
It was just as soon as he started crawling, it was like something changed in him. I think it was a bodily sensory control thing that he couldn't do. He was uncomfortable and couldn't manage it. And now seeing him older and seeing when he gets overwhelmed by big crowds, when he needs to like put his headphones in and like kind of turn in a little bit, he's a sensitive kid. And I think he was physically very sensitive to the world. And it just was a hard time.
Yeah. Well, he's really friendly and outgoing now. I mean,
He is. He's a very sweet kid.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks, Molly, for sharing that. I want to, let me see where I'm at here. I want to just take a second here and hold on. I want to go back for just a second. All right, sorry. Oops, wrong one. All right, I wanted to just go back very, very briefly. Top risk factors. Previous depression or a mental health condition. And inadequate social support are 2 of the top 5. And here's the, what is it, top 12? I don't, here's some other ones.
Oh, I see. Difficult infant temperament.
Yep.
Ding, 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 ding.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's interesting that one of the first risk factors, the other page, had teen parenting, and then advanced maternal age is another risk factor. So what, you're better off having them kids 20 to 30 years when you're 20 to 30 or something?
Yes. Let me see if I can, I saw the rate when they were talking about teen pregnancy. So teen pregnancy, that's a new one, actually, to make the top. That's why I have top 6, because it was always the top 5 was everything else but teen parenting. So younger mothers ages 25 and below were more likely to develop postpartum depression or anxiety. This group prevalence was 30%.
And the advanced maternal age on the next page?
Yeah, I do not know what the cutoff is. A lot of times
It's actually 35.
35. So I had infertility. And so they were saying was above 35.
Right.
So
It was just curious that it's both young and older
and old, yeah.
as risk factors.
And then just wanted to look over this one again, signs and symptoms. So, I guess, feeling overwhelmed and disconnected. I think that's a big piece to it. Feeling incompetent around parenting. I'm just kind of like going through it. Changes in sleep habits. So we all know that parents of newborns are sleep deprived, but it's also when you can't sleep. Baby sleeping, you can't sleep. So not feeling like themselves, just knowing that something is wrong and having upsetting thoughts. All right, I'm just going to quickly go back to where we were. All right, so I'm just going to spend a small amount of time talking about this because honestly, hopefully you don't have to encounter a family with that, although we have encountered a couple of families over the years that have suffered from postpartum psychosis. So I think the difference is the extremity, is that the word? The extreme, it's extreme, like the feelings are extreme and they are accompanied with delusions, hallucinations, being really like out of it, mood swings, paranoia, erratic behavior, that kind of a thing. I mean, this is considered a health crisis if you encounter this. So the biggest risk factor actually is a family history of psychosis, bipolar disorder, history of bipolar disorder. I mean, some of these other ones are also on the list, the sleep loss, the lack of social support and stuff. But the history of, or a family history of bipolar or psychosis is a huge risk factor for postpartum psychosis. Is that on our, so Becky's question was, is that on our questionnaire for families? No, it's not on our questionnaire for families. That's interesting. The families take a questionnaire, or not a questionnaire, but an application. I do want to also say though that 50% of the people who suffer from postpartum psychosis do not have a family history or a history of bipolar disorder or psychosis. So it is a high risk factor, but half the people who get postpartum psychosis did not have that risk factor. One thing I will say though is that if you have suffered from postpartum psychosis, you have a much more elevated risk of in future pregnancies to also experience that. All right, so there's been a lot of studies on maternal mental health issues and the effects on children because everybody cares about the baby and nobody cares about the mother. So it's been really, really well studied. I cited at the end a bunch of studies, but you can just Google it and you can find out a lot more information. So the withdrawn, unresponsive, negative behavior of a mom or a birthing parent with PMADs early in the infant's life affects the maternal-infant bond And infants and children will have may have delayed psychological, cognitive, neurological, or motor development issues. Babies can be fussier. They can have less facial expressions. There is a threefold risk of emotional problems in the children due to the poor maternal-child bond. And if you can kind of look at it as sort of like a vicious cycle, it increases the likelihood of chronic mental health, emotional and family functional problems overall. So the mom is depressed, now the baby's having issues and they're fussier, now the mom's feeling worse and the attachment sort of breaks down. So it's really important. I think I might have mentioned this on another slide, but that some women, I guess it's 5% of women in a study of 4,500 women, reported that they had postpartum depression symptoms for at least 3 years after giving birth. And so that's why one of the reasons it's really important that we can have some interventions to sort of stop this vicious cycle. The good news is that if a mom's maternal depression is treated, then that reduces the children's mental health and behavioral disorders. So we can, if the mom is treated, the family can get back on track. Okay, so this is where we come in. Women who report consistent social support and practical support actually have one half the rate of women who do not. So there are so many different factors that can cause PMADs that are not controllable. You can't control if you have a history of depression. You can control, or it is a controllable risk factor, is social support. It's a protective factor. I love this chart. I'm not going to go into it in too much but what they did is, this is a big study in California, and they looked at women who had consistent social support, practical support, and if they had both, they called that functional support. So let me just see, is it? No, it isn't. So you can see here. So basically, this is their percentages that had anxiety, depressive symptoms, or total symptoms. And basically what this is trying to say here is that if you had practical and emotional support, your rates of PMADs are half what they would be if you did not. That's sort of like bottom lining it. And again, I gave you the site, I cited it in case you wanted to go back and look at it. I love this on so many levels because this is exactly what we do. This is all we do. Okay, some of you have mental health professional backgrounds. Some of you are nurses, but what the program is, it's me and you. I'm there, I'm with you. That's it. And this is the effect that we can have. Hold on a second. Okay, barriers to help. So if only 15% of women are receiving the treatment they need, what's the issue here? Well, first of all, some women don't even know that they're depressed. They don't even know that to look for it. They're not told about it and warned ahead of time. Some, there is a lot of talk about inadequate screening. I think that we've gotten much better, but I'll take me for an example because I had postpartum depression. I received screening until 3 months postpartum. I developed postpartum depression at 6 months. The gold standard is to screen up through 1 year, but it doesn't always happen. And then the other piece that we kind of talked about it before, I mean, it's hard to ask for help. There's a lot of shame and stigma. I think because we only see postpartum psychosis in the news, people don't want to go out and say, oh, I'm having these things, for the shame of like, what if they take my baby away? What if, I get institutionalized? Okay, so the first thing we can do as volunteers is to make sure that we're educating our mamas about this, starting the conversation. And, I think that it might seem a little scary to start the conversation. Hopefully we're going to give you some tips on how to do it. But I think, make yourself a safe place. That's part of being a home visit volunteer, is to make yourself a safe place. Normalize it, destigmatize it. I think, talking about it makes a huge difference. Me going to the moms group that was in Ashfield, where other women had postpartum depression, really helped me a lot. Everybody gets something, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, it's totally normal. I know lots of people who had it. Being sympathetic and not dismissing a parent's concerns, and sleep, movement, getting outdoors makes a huge difference. So if you can hold up baby while mom takes a nap, that's going to help. The other thing that we do is we try to help the parents build social supports. So it's not just about me supporting Mollie, but it's me talking about, other resources and other places that they can meet new parents. That can be very therapeutic, to be around other parents that have similar situations. But even just the tasks of daily living, like wiping down the counters, making a sandwich for them, having adult conversation, all of that support can really help. And it's important to say something to families, even if you're not sure about it. So even if the family seems completely happy, well-adjusted, it's important that we still have the discussion. Okay, that's just, here are some of the resources. So where should a mom go, or parent go for help? So the first one up there, if you didn't see it, says you. That's where they should go. And even if you don't know where to send your mom, we know where to send your mom. Call us. I put primary care physician or OBGYN at the top because that tends to be the majority of people are diagnosed by the primary care physician. And then here are just some resources. Postpartum Support International, I'm a huge fan of them. I'm a member of Postpartum Support International. Parents Helping Parents, that is a hotline where you don't actually have to have a newborn. Anybody can call. Any parent that's experiencing difficulty can call. I tried to give a bunch of locations that would be like 24/7. So if you kind of go down to the bottom a little bit, Emergency Services Program Directory, this is something I didn't even know about it. But when you call that number and you put in your zip code, it will provide information on interventions that are in your area. I thought that was pretty neat. Mollie mentioned MCPAP for Moms, Massachusetts Child Psychiatry Access Project for Moms. And again, that is actually for your primary care physician or other physicians to reach out to this organization. So it's really meant for health professionals to use. But, just in case your doctor doesn't know about it, make sure you tell your families that they can ask for support through MCPAP for Moms. And then I put at the bottom there the day hospital. Hopefully none of our parents are going to go in there, but I just think it's revolutionary. It is a short-term mental health facility for mom and baby. A lot of times moms fear getting the treatment they need because they don't want to be separated from their child. And I just love that it's for mom and baby.
Lisa, Jean here. Isn't a lot of this is in the resource kits we give to the families too, right?
Okay. So
I always. Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I always make sure I bring one of those little bags, and that resource booklet is filled with information. If mom has time to go through it, or if the volunteer has time to go through it with the mother on the first couple of visits, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the one thing, so we have a welcome kit that we give to new families, but the thing about it is, it could be something that's like put on the side and not looked at again. when we can get two families before the baby comes, that's ideal, because that's when you have time
Yes.
to go through the folder. What I think is really important is that you as a volunteer learn what's in the folder, understand what's in the folder, and so can point to the resources if the parent needs it. I think that that would be extremely helpful. But I think that just giving it to them wouldn't be enough. I think it's, if we talk about the subject early and often and normalize it, that, then when they ask for it, we'll be able to point them to some of the materials in the book that we give them. I have found by doing this presentation so many amazing resources that when we put this up into the volunteer portal, which I'll show you in a minute, I want to make sure that those materials are also there for you. Last slide, 5 things you can say right now. If you can do nothing else, remember this. Making sure that families know they're not alone. This isn't something this doesn't make them a bad person. It's not their fault. And it's nothing to be ashamed about or embarrassed about. And I think number 5 is the important one. They can get better. With treatment, it will get better. Without treatment, not so much. So it's just super important that we just remember what's here. If you were to remember anything, I would say what's here and then the intrusive thoughts part. Okay, so let me just go back to, whoopsie. All right, I'm going to be taking this down in a minute, so I'll just leave it like this. So these are what we talked about today. What piece of this do you need more information on, if any? What questions do you have on any of this?
I guess like my biggest question regarding all of it is how do you make that determination as to when it's postpartum and when it's really they need intervention, whether they realize it or not? Like how because that could be a very fine line. And
so I think that one piece to it, well, first of all, if a family, if there's someone suffering from a PMAD, like a postpartum depression, that needs intervention too. You know what I mean? So if we're normalizing and talking about this a lot, we don't want someone to suffer when they don't have to. So I kind of look at it that some of the key indicators of like postpartum psychosis is that they're going to be delusional. You know what I mean? They might be like euphoric, or they might be like, just like, so when Mollie said about how the doctor was like, if you feel like it's scary, you're having intrusive thoughts and it's scary, that's a better sign than if you're just having intrusive thoughts. Extreme paranoia is another indicator that somebody might have postpartum psychosis. But I think that in your position, help is better than no help, regardless of where it's at in the journey. We've had a couple of moms who had postpartum psychosis. They became very like disconnected, almost like, I don't want to say high, but sort of just like not there, not really with it. It's kind of like off in their own sort of little world. That was some of these symptoms that we saw. Mollie, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that.
One of the things that I've read is that often when there is, let's say, a mom who's having a postpartum psychosis, that because it often ends in the death of the child as well as herself, it can be like the point of it is she is going to die, and so it's often similar, I think, to someone who is suicidal and the things that you would do for a person who was contemplating suicide. That if they're acting like they're making plans, like the planning is very comforting, apparent. So it's like the difference between that you want to drown your baby. It's like, I don't want to, who's saying that? I don't want to drown my baby. And oh, that would fix everything. If I just drowned them, that would fix everything. That, because they can't live in this world. There's something so horrible that they cannot live and I cannot live. And that planning of how they're going to end it is actually very comforting. So that's something that is a huge red flag. Sometimes I've read that they do say, like, don't leave me, like, to their partner, you cannot leave me with this baby, because they're feeling that something horrible is going to happen. And so that's a thing that we need to be aware of, that if that is so overwhelming, that if she is, and it's okay to someone who is suicidal, like, it feels counterintuitive, but what you're supposed to say is, do you have plans to hurt yourself? And give them an opportunity to say yes, and say, okay, then I'm not going to leave. We're going to make sure that you are safe. And I think that's something that it's okay to ask it in a way, if you are a safe person, and that you've built a safety that they can answer that question. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and again, I think just because we're talking about it with our families, not talking about postpartum psychosis, but talking about PMADs, and normalizing it will allow for the family to open up more. That's the hope, right? That's the hope.
I have a
Right.
question. I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
You said you see about 36 families a year. What was the percentage of the mothers that you felt, did your volunteers volunteer to you, suffer from this?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think part of this grant that we got to start asking the questions will help maybe inform that. We
Okay.
haven't been, that's not something that we know the answer to now, but it would be interesting.
So is it something that you're thinking about tracking?
I'm sorry.
Something that you're thinking of tracking?
Well, since you said it, so because you said it made me think, oh, is that something we could track?
Do you mind if I jump in for a minute with this one? So one of the things in terms of our grant writing that helped us sort of also pinpoint what is our goal, what is a goal of the home visit program. We have had this discussion. Can we say we reduce the rates of postpartum depression? Probably not.
Well,
Because
that's not where I was going with it.
yeah. So one of the things
I was just curious
yeah.
about, because, and for example, I have, my oldest daughter just had her second baby in August, and she lives in a very urban environment. And I have a middle daughter who lives in White River Junction. And so she's obviously going to be in a far more isolated situation. And so I was just curious. I mean, I'm listening to this. I love the fact that you said it knows no, environmental, you can be very isolated one or the other.
Yeah.
But I was just curious in terms of the hill towns, or certainly where we live in a much more rural area, if there's more prevalence or not. I was just curious.
Didn't we look that up once? I feel like we talked about that.
In terms of, I can't imagine there's been a study of, the hill towns,
Right.
But there are the studies of the isolation in non-postpartum. The isolation leads to more depression. There's more mental health crises because we have fewer care providers in the hill towns who deal with mental health. That there is more, there are more barriers. There's more stigma. Sometimes in more rural communities, there's less understanding about therapy and mental health and wellness, that there may be a little bit more stigma and more hardy than your average, those city kids up in Northampton with their therapists. Like, there is a different culture. But at the same time, that culture is not going to lend itself to documenting it. Like, they could be suffering and not be disclosing it. So how would we know if those rates are higher? So it's complicated. It's really complicated.
All right.
Lisa, are you going to be sending we're going to retake our postpartum depression survey, right? See what we've learned.
Yes.
So as you get off this call, if you wouldn't mind, I'll send it out too. clicking on that link and taking the test again. And that'll help us figure out if you got something out of it, what we might want to do differently, what resources we need to send to you. We want to make sure that everybody's prepared when you go out to your families.